Hey everyone, it's Monica. Welcome back to Homeschool Voices. Today I'm going to talk about why it's so important to do your best to make your child's education relevant to them. Before we discuss your child's education and how best to plan it, let's take a little trip back in time and think about your own education. So let's take history, for example, because we're talking about how to make things relevant, right? So think about it. You read a chapter in your history book, and then you studied for 2 days. I don't know. Most people don't study too long. A lot of people cram the night before. But let's say you studied for 3 days. Okay? So you studied for 3 days, and you took the test, and you got 100%. You knew everything on the test and then some. You knew a lot of stuff, right? Now tell me honestly, next year, if you were to have had that same test, how would you score? The exact same test. The one that you had seen before with the answers, how would you score? What about 5 years after the original test? What about today? How would you score today on that test? Now, then there's other things like spelling. You do spelling. Not really fun for most people, okay? You get a spelling list. You study, you take the test, you get 100%. What's the likelihood that next year you know how to spell all those words? It's pretty high, right? What's the difference? The spelling is relevant. It's not that it's entertaining or fabulous. Relevant can mean entertaining. It can mean fabulous. But sometimes it's just something that you use all the time. Sometimes it's something you're interested in. That's what makes it relevant. In this example, the spelling is relevant because you use it all the time. You're going to retain that information. In the history example, for that child, maybe you, I think most of you can relate to this. At some point in your history education, you read a chapter that you couldn't care less about. It was boring and you resented having to do it. And I bet you don't remember that information now because it wasn't relevant. Not only was it not relevant, but then you never reviewed it. You didn't care, and it wasn't reviewed constantly. So like with spelling, you probably don't really care, but it's relevant in the sense that you need that information all the time. You write those words all the time. And so you have to recall the information, and it sticks in your brain. So you can think of a similar example with math. A lot of people argue that you don't really need to study math. And I think this is personally, this is a scary argument. I don't like it. Because I look at math as sort of a brain workout, sort of like weightlifting for the brain. That's how I think about it. So I think that you need math, but I would agree a little bit with the spirit of that argument. So I would say that you don't need very advanced math. I mean, I think in daily life, we do basic addition, subtraction, division, multiplication. And people say, oh, I don't really divide. I think you do, and you're so good at it that you just don't realize that you did it, and you did it so quickly. In fact, before my kids could even recognize that they needed to do a division problem, say if I read a word problem out loud, they would get the right answer by dividing in their head, but they wouldn't be able to tell me. So if I said, write that problem down, they wouldn't know that it was a division problem. They were confused, but they could give me the right answer. So I think when a lot of people say, oh, I don't really use division or multiplication, I think you're actually reasonably good at it, and you just don't realize that you're using it that much. I think we use very basic algebra, like 2x equals 6, oh, x is 3, obviously. We use that stuff. And I think what should be taught in the high school level is statistics. Not only statistics, but how studies are put together, how to recognize flaws in studies, and that is math, sort of like applied math, not really mathy, but sort of mathy. Those sort of things I would say everyone needs. Basic geometry. Everyone should know basic properties of squares and rectangles and triangles, perimeter, area. These things are actually useful in life. Actually, I had to make a skirt for my daughter because you couldn't buy them really, and they had to be very specific. They had very specific requirements at her dance school. And I was just offended by the price that they were charging, but they would let me make it. That's how cheap I am. I probably saved $5 at the end of the day, but I was just offended. No, maybe 10. But whatever, it was fun, okay? So I used math. I used circumference, and I did have to look up circumference, but me being exposed to circumference and figuring out problems with circumference and pi and all of that made it very easy. I just had to quickly look something up, and I knew what I had to do to figure out the right measurements and essentially to figure out how much fabric I needed to buy and to make a pattern that would actually fit her, and it fit her beautifully and it worked well. And I used geometry and I think some basic algebra. I mean, nothing complicated, but basic algebra, basic geometry, I definitely used when I made that pattern. And it wasn't hard for me. And I'm glad that I didn't have to overpay because I didn't know how to do those things. And I'm sure there are a million other examples, but for some reason it's hard to remember. I always recognize the examples when I see them, but they are hard to remember later. But see, that math was relevant to me, and that's why I remembered it, because I've needed it in real life. I would argue that more advanced math like calculus or trigonometry, unless your child is very math-minded and might go into a career where they need that math, I think most of us aren't going to need to study it. And I think we'd probably be better off studying philosophy or politics than advanced math. One of my favorite subjects when trying to explain why relevance is important is history. So think about a kid who grew up in California. What does their history education look like? We know they're going to spend some serious time learning about California history, the missions, the gold rush, everything in California. Okay, and then they're going to learn about US history. Okay, and then they're going to learn about world history. Okay, think about a kid in New York, similar idea, except apparently they don't need to learn California history. Apparently it's very important if you live in California, but if you live in New York, not important at all, but very important to learn about New York history, about the local tribe, like Indian tribes back in 1500s or 1600s or 1700s, you know, important to learn all of those things. And then of course, they're gonna learn US history and America and world history. Think about a kid in Canada. They're gonna learn about their local province, and then they're gonna learn about their country, Canada, and then they're gonna learn about the world. Think about a kid in China. Same idea. Now their education starts to look very different from our education, right? They're going to learn about their local province. I don't know if you call them provinces. And then they're going to learn about Chinese history. And then they're going to learn about world history. Now, it's obvious to see that it is a very common idea, actually, that history needs to be relevant to kids. Because that's the way we teach it. If you live in America, you learn a lot more American history than if you live in France, I promise you. If you live in China, you learn a lot more Chinese history than if you live in India. I promise you. But what about the world history? Does everyone learn world history in the same way? I don't think so. As an American, I learned about the American Revolution. Honestly, I learned more about the American Revolution as a homeschool parent than I ever did in school. But I learned, and it was taught. Okay, now, how does a kid in England, how do they learn about the American Revolution? How is it taught? It's probably taught more as an uprising. I forget the term. You can tell me in the comments below, but it's not positive how it's viewed. But when you learn about it in America, it's very positive. And when school kids learn about it in England, not so positive. It's like we were a bunch of troublemakers. Maybe we were, I don't know. My point is, when you learn world history, it is through the lens of your culture and your country. And I think that's right. I actually think that's right. Because there are only so many hours in a day and only so many years to teach these kids. We have limited time. Why wouldn't we teach what is relevant to them? Why wouldn't we teach them about the state that they live in and about the country that they live in? Why wouldn't we do that? Because we are teaching them about their place in the world. I mean, yeah, and we're just talking about history, guys, here, but do you see how it's a common idea that education needs to be relevant, but as a homeschooler, you can make it more relevant. So we are going to take a trip to Italy later this year, and you better believe we're going to be learning all about Italy, about its recent history, about its ancient history, about the specific cities that we're going to. We're going to learn all about it because all of a sudden, Italian history is relevant to my kids. They will enjoy their trip better, and they will remember everything that they learn better. If they learn about Italy in World War II, that will become this hook for future information. So in the future, when they learn about World War II, they will sort of hook that new information onto the Italy information and onto the things that they saw when they went to Italy. You see, it's important to make education relevant. Aside from being important, it actually just serves you. Because what can happen, especially if we're not talking about a subject like spelling or basic math, right, that the child is going to use over and over, or reading, right? You don't really have to like reading, but it's relevant in the sense that you're going to use that skill over and over and over in your life. Now, when we're talking about science, when we're talking about history, why not try to make what you're teaching your kids relevant? You would be surprised how often you have the opportunity to do that. Why not teach them about biology, especially in the younger years, but even in the older years, about biology through the lens of the human body, so they can learn about the little teeny parts of their body and how it affects their health, and how well, they can just develop a better understanding of their body and how to be healthy, happy people. Why not? Why not make it relevant? It will stick better. Because I think that we have this idea, and it's just not based in reality, guys, that we can teach them anything and force them to memorize it and do it on a certain time schedule. And I think if they're not going to use that information, they're not going to be required to recall it regularly, such as the skill of reading, such as basic math, such as spelling. If they're not going to have to use it on a regular basis, and they're not interested, they're not going to remember it. Just think about your own life. There are very few things, and there are rare people that will memorize things they're not interested in, or just get interested in things that most people don't get interested in. I'm just saying, have your goals. Like I always say, make long-term educational plans. Use those long-term plans to decide what you're going to do this year, and then what you're going to do this week if necessary, because I don't know about you guys, but I need some direction because I'm tired a lot and I don't want to have to make it up every day. But be flexible. Like for us, we're going to go to Italy. I went in my office, I went to the computer and I requested a bunch of books about Rome so far. And then, the other places that we're going to go. So allow for flexibility. Closely related to relevance is this idea of outcomes, because they are at odds. So if you're super worried about your child meeting certain goals or benchmarks at certain times, you're really largely probably not going to be teaching them things that are relevant to them, especially in the areas of science and history. Really, you're just wasting your time, because they will learn that stuff very temporarily and then they will forget it. If they're not interested, they're going to forget it. So watch my video about outcomes and why it's more important to focus on your journey than on your destination. I will link to it at the end here. I hope this video was really helpful to you guys. If you have any questions, thoughts, or opinions, please put them in the comments below. I really love to hear from you guys. If you have any ideas for any other videos you'd like me to make, please put those ideas in the comments below as well. If you like this video, please click thumbs up. And if you want to see more videos like this, please click subscribe and the notification bell next to it. In the meantime, happy homeschooling and have a great day.